Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're checking out one of the newest monitors from Viotek, a popular budget monitor brand in the United States that we've looked at a few times on the channel previously. Viotek generally buy their displays from ODMs, so while it can be difficult to find these exact models in other countries, occasionally they pop up under a different brand name elsewhere, for example Kogan here in Australia. But I'm not here to talk about the dynamics of the ODM reseller market. It's pretty interesting stuff, but we'll save that for a different time. I'm just interested in the monitor itself and how it performs today. On the test bench is the Viotek GFV27DAB, and I was particularly curious about this display for a few reasons. One is that it's a 27-inch 1440p 144Hz monitor, which is still, in my opinion, the sweet spot for modern PC gaming. Another is that it's a flat VA panel, not the usual curved stuff we get from other companies. And also, we're seeing a retail price tag below $300, making it one of the cheaper models out there. This particular display is actually the first flat 27-inch 1440p VA panel that I've seen. I have checked out a 32-inch flat VA before in LG's 32GK650F, which I ended up quite liking, but that used a panel from AU Optronics, who for some reason created a 32-inch VA but never bothered releasing a 27-inch model. The Viotek GFV27DAB though uses a Samsung SVA panel. I thought these were only available in curved variants, but here we are with a flat one, which I definitely appreciate. I know curved versus flat is a bit of a personal preference thing. I tend to think curved displays are best suited to larger formats and ultrawides in particular. For a 27-inch panel, including an 1800R or 1500R curve doesn't make much sense, and if anything makes the monitor worse. So Viotek opting for this flat variant is a welcome move. Viotek are also keeping up with advancements in the budget monitor space. A few years back, all you'd get from these budget class displays is a very basic stand, normally just with tilt adjustment. But companies like AOC have been putting the pressure on other manufacturers, opting to include fully height adjustable stands in some of the cheapest models on the market. Putting a basic tilt only stand in your cheap monitor doesn't cut it anymore, and clearly Viotek have recognized this, as the GFV27DAB comes with much better ergonomics than their previous offerings. The stand included here is fully height, tilt, swivel and pivot adjustable while still being very sturdy. It doesn't have the greatest mechanisms for each of these movements, not the smoothest going around, but at least the functionality is included here. The trade-off comes from build materials. Previously you'd get exposed metal legs with the more basic stand offerings. Now it's just plastic, which is fine for budget displays, but is not going to blow your socks off. In fact, almost all of this display is built from plastic, at least on the outside. The rear has some gamer elements like weird angles and vents, all the usual stuff, but it actually doesn't look that bad. The most interesting inclusion here is perhaps the RGB LED ring around the stand connection, which is something you don't often get with an entry-level product. That's normally a more premium feature. That said, I don't think it's a very useful inclusion, but some people may like it. The rest of the build here is pretty solid, to be honest. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle on the back, and the interface is easy to navigate as a result. There's even some gaming features in there like crosshairs and timers. We also get a display port, 2 HDMI ports and an audio jack, plus a USB port which is for firmware updates only. Let's dive into performance now. Looking at the first of 4 overdrive modes, which is the default mode, off. Nothing particularly amazing here. This is standard stuff for a VA, with an average grey-to-grey transition of 8.76 milliseconds, a bit of dark level smearing with those slow black transitions, and just generally this isn't fast enough to keep up with the 144Hz refresh rate. Let's see how it fares when we crank up the overdrive. The low mode is surprisingly decent. Dark level smearing isn't fully alleviated, but now we only have a single row of affected transitions, which is better than most other VA monitors. Overshoot creeps in slightly at the top end, but an overall grey-to-grey average of 5.78 milliseconds is pretty good, all things considered. The middle mode is right on the edge of what this panel can do at 144Hz, and to be honest, it delivers a pretty great experience from a budget class display. 4.76 millisecond grey-to-grey average is what you'd expect from a decent IPS, the only downside being those couple of transitions affected by dark level smearing. But what you can notice compared to the previous model is that with each increase to overdrive, dark level smearing is reduced. So it seems in creating these overdrive modes, this display's engineers have paid special attention to some of the limitations of VA and are trying to mitigate them here as best as they can. What we end up with here is a display that can deliver a true 144Hz experience. If the response times exceeded the refresh window, this can introduce added smearing, which often reduces the clarity benefit you get from the higher refresh rate. But with 96% of transitions occurring faster than the refresh window, this isn't a problem while using this mode. The high mode is not a mode I'd recommend using, as there is significant overshoot present. The panel does get pushed to a 4 millisecond greater gray average, but just from these overshoot results, you can see how this panel really isn't capable of those response times. Unfortunately, while the middle mode is great for gaming at 144Hz, it's not suitable for any sort of adaptive sync usage. Even dropping down to 120Hz starts to introduce significant inverse ghosting, which is visible as a bright trail following moving objects, and it just keeps getting worse at lower refresh rates. Middle is only suitable if you're locking the monitor to 144Hz or are consistently gaming around that refresh rate. Low gives you a bit more flexibility with refresh rates, but the window of usability is still fairly narrow. Inverse ghosting with this mode starts to be obvious around 100Hz. I could see someone using this with adaptive sync if frame rates are consistently high and performance isn't too bad at around 4 to 5 milliseconds, but you really don't want to be using the low overdrive mode below 100Hz. At the end of the day, this only leaves one overdrive mode that is usable throughout the entire refresh range, and that's overdrive off. Unfortunately, this does limit performance at the top end. Using this mode at either 144Hz or 120Hz ends up looking quite similar due to 8 millisecond-ish response times, but it's not bad at lower refresh rates, offering around a 7 millisecond experience with limited overshoot. And while dark level smearing is present with this mode at higher refresh rates, at 100Hz and below it's honestly not too bad, so this mode is pretty good if you'll be gaming more around the 60 to 100Hz mark. Of course, it is disappointing that there's no single overdrive mode that's optimized for the entire refresh range, but what we do have here are essentially two modes that cater for the higher and lower ends of the range. I'd stick to low overdrive up near 144Hz and off at below 100Hz. Given this is a budget display and either mode works quite well for its optimal range, I think this is a pretty good showing from a VA. How does the GFV27DAB stack up to other monitors on the market, particularly 1440p displays? Well, when looking at maximum performance, so in this case the middle overdrive mode, it fares pretty well all things considered. The VA panel used here competes with some mid-range IPS offerings, such as the Innolux panel in the ViewSonic VX2758 2KP MHD, or the AUO panel in ASUS's Tough Gaming VG27AQ. Both of these IPS monitors are more expensive, but perform similarly. And when compared to other VA monitors such as the AOC CQ27G2, the LG 32GK650F, and Gigabyte's Aorus CV27Q, thanks to great overdrive tuning, the Viotek GFV27DAB outperforms these models at 144Hz. One of the major downsides to VA displays for gaming is dark level smearing, but relative to other VAs, the GFV27DAB doesn't have bad levels of smearing. Up at the higher overdrive modes, it's only a handful of transitions with really slow response times, which is very different to most VAs in this chart. A display like the AOC CQ27G2, for example, has a 14 millisecond dark level average compared to just 7.8 milliseconds for the Viotek panel. However, while the Viotek panel fares well, most IPS panels are that step above, particularly the best of the best. As for refresh rate compliance, I'm comfortable saying this is a true 144Hz monitor when running at either the middle overdrive mode as seen in this chart, or at the low mode. Again, nicely tuned overdrive pushes this VA to its limits, and we end up with very solid best case performance. When I say push to the limits, this is what I'm referring to. The GFV27DAB is pushing a fine line between response times and error rates. An average error rate of 6.3% in this mode is on the poorer side, although no worse than the ViewSonic IPS monitor that performs around the same mark. This is how these monitors perform at 60Hz, with the GFV27DAB falling in the middle with around a 6.6 millisecond response time using the off overdrive mode. Not too different from other models here. And then we get to input lag, not much in the way of a processing delay, so the total input lag in the chain ends up below 10 milliseconds, which is a great result. Power consumption is a bit higher than average, but the difference between most monitors here is just 5 to 10 watts, so there's no significant efficiency differences between any of these displays at roughly the same size and refresh rate. The Viotek GFV27DAB does include a backlight strobing mode called MPRT. However, there is significant strobe crosstalk, as you can see from repeated images in Blurbuster's UFO test. This makes the mode rather useless, as the artifacts introduced are noticeable and quite ugly, so it's not something I'd recommend using or something that you should be basing your buying decision around. Shifting gears to color performance now, and as a basic mid to entry level 1440p monitor, there's nothing special going on here. A simple sRGB color gamut, so no wide gamut functionality, and while there is a brief mention of HDR support on Viotek's website, there's no display HDR certification, so the display can accept HDR inputs, but it has no way of showing them in all its glory outside of a regular SDR presentation. Out of the box color calibration is, well, quite terrible if I'm honest. My unit had a strong blue tint from the factory, as you can see from this rather wild CCT curve on the left. But not just that, the gamma was also well off the correct values for sRGB, coming in with a total of 2.7, which pushes darker colors much darker than they should be. This leads to a very high delta EITP average of 24.82, which simply is not accurate at all. This strong tint has significant ramifications for color performance. In saturation, an average delta EITP of 22.4 is bad, but also the delta E2000 average of 7.38 does not compare favorably to other monitors I've tested. In fact, when looking at Color Checker, these default out-of-the-box results are the worst of all the monitors I've tested using my current test suite. That's more than 50 monitors tested, and this one was the worst. I used the following OSD settings to get me some of the way to correcting this panel's performance. I should note here that I'd recommend increasing the sharpness from 50 to 75. The default setting of 50 is a bit blurry, while 75 looks normal. Another thing is I had to disable the gamma controls entirely to get even close to sRGB level performance, which is not something I'd normally have to do. What this leads to are much more acceptable results, but it's definitely not perfect. The CCT curve looks a lot better here, as does the gamma curve, although now gamma is a little too low. Delta E performance is improved, but I wouldn't class this accurate just yet. There are still some issues with saturation performance, for example with a delta E of above 2.0 in both metrics, and same situation with Color Checker. With these sorts of results, a lot is riding on software calibration. The more an ICC profile needs to correct, the worse the results generally are. I was able to fix the grayscale performance, few errors here and there, but it's not bad. Saturation performance as well was great with the delta E below 2.0, but in the more stringent Color Checker test, I'm still not overly happy with the results. Normally I'd like to see a delta E 2000 average below 1.0 and delta E ITP below 2.0, but well, we're not quite there. What this means in practice is that the GFV27DAB doesn't deliver the best calibrated results, and you might struggle to get a good picture out of the box or when just using the OSD controls. I don't think monitors, especially entry-level gaming monitors, necessarily need to be perfectly accurate for gaming, but how this particular unit ships from the factory is not acceptable. Patreon members can try out the ICC profile we created, links are in the description below. The GFV27DAB produces good levels of brightness, especially for just an SDR panel. Around 380 nits is plenty for most viewing conditions. On the other hand, contrast was mediocre for a VA panel at just 2000 to 1. Granted, this is still higher than all IPS monitors I've tested, so you will get deeper blacks here, but some of the best units push up closer to 3000 to 1 or higher. However, you don't face the IPS glow issues of IPS monitors either when opting for a VA, so that's another benefit. Viewing angles are also very good from this VA display, better than I normally see from VAs, and I think the lack of curve helps here. This is approaching IPS level viewing angles. Uniformity is also reasonable when viewing brighter content, but less good when viewing darker content. There was a noticeable fall off along the left and right sides using a 30% white pattern. Overall, this review is really a tale of two halves. In the first half, when we talked about response time performance, I was actually fairly happy with the results, especially when we consider this is just a budget VA panel. Yeah, there are two different optimal overdrive modes depending on whether you want to game at higher or lower refresh rates, but the offerings in either mode are quite decent. Especially if you are considering playing up near 144Hz, the Viotek GFV27DAB delivers a true 144Hz experience. In fact, in a lot of cases, the level of clarity and ghosting is similar to that of a mid-range IPS monitor, like those from ViewSonic in the VX27582KP MHD, or say ASUS with the Tough Gaming VG27AQ. The only real difference between this VA panel and those IPS monitors is in dark level smearing, which all things considered, is a lot better with the GFV27DAB than we normally see from VAs. But the other half to this story is color performance. The inherent panel here is reasonable. It's flat, decent resolution, good sRGB gamut coverage, but Viotek has made no attempt whatsoever to calibrate it at the factory, instead shipping it in an unacceptable state that's only partially correctable through the OSD controls. To top it off, the contrast ratio isn't great for a VA panel. It's better than other monitor types, but not as good as it can get, which takes away what is normally a strong point to these sorts of displays. So in the end, my opinion here is a bit mixed. On a performance perspective, this display is especially strong given its sub $300 price point. I think the value proposition there is quite good for gaming. But anyone less adept at tuning their display to look good, anyone that just wants a good picture out of the box, for example, should probably steer clear. And that's it for this review of the Viotek GFV27DAB. I know this monitor isn't going to be available for everyone worldwide, as Viotek generally sells only into the United States, but hopefully this still gives you a bit of information if you are in a market where these monitors are available as to what this particular panel is providing. You can of course support us and our display testing on Patreon. You can get access to all the ICC profiles we've created throughout the years on there. It's a great way to support the channel. We also would like you to subscribe so you can catch more of our display testing in the future, and I'll catch you in the next one.